So YouTube Analytics is annoying. Its summary says people only watch 1 minute, but digging in, there's actually several people watching to the end. So I hope those of you that do watch get some value out of these videos. Leave a like if you do, and if you think others might like it, consider sharing it with them. Anyway, this video is going to be a bit convoluted, so strap in. I'm continuing the work with interactive brokers, going to build the REST API interface in this video. So if you want to see the work up to this point, there's a playlist in the description. On to coding. The first step is to create the tickets needed to outline the work. There's several, but I'm only going to work on 2 of them, which are creating the REST API wrapper and getting a stock symbol ticks. Leave a comment if you'd like to see these other items worked on. I'm probably going to create videos on those as well, but it would be nice to know if it's actually something you want to see. First up, I'll need to copy the program file over to my working project folder from the sample code that Interactive Brokers provides. Then I need to break out the classes within that program file into their own files. The reason is that the program file needs to include the web server, but the web server also needs to include the test app class. With everything in the program file, the web server would include the program file and create a circular reference. But if the test app class is in its own file, then the program file can include both the test app and the web server, while the web server only includes the test app. By breaking them up into their own files also makes it easier to work on and remember what the code does. I also need to clean up the imports and need to have interactive brokers running to be able to test what I code. Next is building the web server class. Just copy and paste an example off the web and modify it as needed. Always reuse code when you can. Trying to figure out how to get the test app class referenced turns into a PITA with a simple answer. Not a great answer though, but it's a simple approach. With a given post to the web server, we want to be able to call the historical data request, which is just the tick history of a given symbol. Due to the event-driven approach that Interactive Brokers uses, we need a way to cache the response. I'm just using a queue. This loop will wait for the queue to get data, but there is an end message event, which I will change the code a little later on. But for now, testing and getting everything working, this is the first approach. Oh, this is important. You need to make a copy of the queue to be able to remove items from it within the loop. Otherwise, it'll throw an error. I convert it to JSON, but it's actually not in JSON format. We will need to write to the HTTP response stream with the proper JSON format, which it isn't. Then I add a timeout in case something doesn't work. It will time out, but I don't complete this code until later. Then we need to add the instantiation of the web server to the main program file. And I place the web server into a thread because the wait for server function is a blocking function, And by putting it into a thread, this allows interactive brokers loop to run as well. The web server class actually has a threading function, but I didn't take the time to look into how it actually works. This is the nightmare that plagues me for a while. Okay. I need to pass the Interactive Brokers app to the web loop so that the web loop can make calls into the Interactive Brokers app. The problem is how the web server is created. The creation of the web server is through HTTP server, not the class that I created. So HTTP server creates an instance of my class, which doesn't let me pass in a constructor variable. There is a convoluted way of doing this, but I ended up just creating a static class variable for interactive brokers. To call the interactive brokers historical data function, we need a contract that represents the stock market symbol. So here I'm capturing the end message. After the data is transmitted for a historical data request, I store the event in a message dictionary and just flag it as called or not. I do change this to handle success or errors a little later. So I need to change the wait loop to look for the message instead of looking for available data. Oh, and I'm using the request ID as it seems to be the identifying factor across all the messages. Now that it's more or less working, I need to create the script that will post to the web server and get the ticks. Again, copy and pasting code. No need to reinvent the wheel. This is where I fix the Interactive Brokers application reference by just creating a static class variable. For some reason that I currently don't understand, I cannot call the successive calls for historical data. I can only call the first one, which is 4102. Not sure what's going on there. Here I'm actually implementing the timeout functionality properly. I need to add the message event to each of the functions I'm calling. If you notice, each one is with their respective request IDs, and ensure that they are set to false. And finally figuring out how to set the proper timeout function. It's easy enough to figure out, but it just gets ignored until it becomes a problem. This is where I add error handling into the REST API and use better status messages to track what's going on with the Interactive Brokers API. So with that, we are able to get the error message to print out. I'm trying a bunch of different approaches and breaking down the steps between my application and the test application that is provided by Interactive Brokers, trying to understand why it's giving me this error of not allowed. I copy over the contract that they are using just to make sure that it's not an issue with the contract class. I'm checking their output, trying to understand what the difference is. I directly compare their function call with my function call to see if there's any differences, which there isn't. So I comment out their code and call only the function I'm calling within their code to see what happens, and voila. I get the same error that I'm seeing on my code. This tells me that I have to call the 4102 request as to the 4103 request. I want to make sure that everything in my code is the same as to their code with all those changes. Just want to make sure. Trying to figure out why it's not printing anything. This is where I realize it's not a JSON object. I'm breaking down the data to see what the data structure is. Then crafting a regular expression to process the return information. As I'm looking at it while I'm editing this video, I see that I could simplify the regular expression by switching the specific words to just the word check, maybe in the future. And there we go. Just iterate through each of the found items and print out the results. But I decided to format a little better, and I believe that's everything. But it's not. I still need to pass parameters through to the REST API. First, I need to be able to read the passed in parameters on the web server, parse those into a dictionary. This is Python 3, which requires urllib.parse. The downside of copying code off the internet, it's legacy code that needs to be updated to version 3 of Python. We go to the definition of the contract class to determine all the parameters that can be set. Then we need to check to see if the parameter was passed in and set the variable on the contract class if it was. Then we move the contract class from the web server over to the script that actually calls the REST API and pass those parameters in the post body. Here we need to clean the parameters being passed to the web server. Just strip off all the extra characters. Oh, and for some reason, the parameters value are treated as an array, so there may be some improvements on parsing these parameters in the future to allow multiple values per each parameter. But for now, I just need it to work. Now we need the parameters for the function call. They need to be processed from the post body. It's pretty straightforward, just as before. Get the parameters of the function to use as the names for the post parameters. Set the default values to the ones we've been using. Then create the if statements that will check if they were actually passed in. The last two should be integers, and I didn't change their type. Might need to do that. Then just move the values I've been using from the web server over to the client script. Fix the error that's popping up. And there we go. Same results as before. And we can change the parameters from the client and see if it works. And it does. At this point, the REST API is functional to retrieve the ticks for a given symbol. Next, I'm working on getting the search capability to be able to find the symbols, because this contract thing is overly complex, and it'd be better if it just tells me what it needs instead of trying to figure it out. And that's it. The code for this is on GitHub, as I showed at the beginning of the video. Links in the description if you'd like to use this code for anything. If you're not subscribed, I'm going to keep producing videos about coding, I guess basically code reviews on the regular. If you like this kind of content and want to see more, consider supporting this work. And thanks for watching the video. Until next time.